being recorded on active speaker mode. So at any time, if you have a question, clarification, observation, just unmute yourself and jump on in, but you will be recorded. If you would not like to be recorded and want me to ask the question or say your observation, just type it into the chat feature and I will contribute it anonymously. Other than that, we are ready to go. Pat, on to you.
Okay, great. I am going to try to move through this as quickly as possible because I think it'd be fun for folks to talk about where I'm going to land. So this is going to carry us through the House voting on impeachment, and obviously nothing's happened in the Senate yet. And I just thought it would be fun for you folks to have a chance to speculate about what you think might happen in the Senate, why you think it might happen. Okay. I'm going to talk more broadly at the very beginning, and it's about the environment within which congressional Republicans in both the House and the Senate operated, and it placed constant pressure on them from Trump, directly and indirectly. When it comes to the direct impact, it was Trump's implicit, sometimes explicit threat to primary Republicans who didn't toe the line with him. And although the results there are a little mixed, it's enough to make a member of the House or this, particularly the House, but even the Senate, feel a little threatened. The pressure worked indirectly through congressional party leadership, through the Republican Party leadership in both the House and the Senate, who continue to operate in the old world where that was sort of your job. If the president was of your party, your job was to facilitate the president getting his agenda through. So you tried to work with that president. I would note the obvious. It's not as though Republican Party leadership in the House and the Senate did this happily or without complaint. For one thing, Trump made their job more difficult because he would flip-flop on what he intended to do. My absolute favorite was relatively early on, the negotiating session where he was meeting with Pelosi and Schumer, and Pelosi, being much smarter than Donald Trump, sort of moved him into agreeing something to do with the border and with immigration, and then he had to walk that back when he started recognizing what he'd actually done. But in the end, it didn't matter. All these Republicans in the House and the Senate just felt direct and indirect pressure from Trump to go along. You can, I'm gonna skip through some of this stuff so we can move along. I kind of think that this dynamic worked more effectively in the House because you had smaller, more homogeneous districts. So it makes it easier then to pull a QAnon supporter from the district to run in the primary against that candidate. I'm sorry, I'm just deciding to really cut stuff out to leave more time for you folks. I did gather some data on this stuff, so we'd actually have data to play around with here. And it had to do, the first thing has to do with just as a whole, what Republican Party unity looked like in the House and the Senate. So if I'm going to move these from the 2 Congresses that were the last under Obama, and then the first one under Trump, okay? In the House, it just stayed high. So Obama 1, Obama 2, and then Trump, 94% on the Republican side, party unity, 95, 96. In the Senate, it bounced around a little bit. It's kind of in the neighborhood, 94, 91, 97. The meaning of all this. These increasing levels of partisan conflict and cohesion. So the polarization tearing them apart, and then cohesion pulling Republicans together and pulling Democrats together, subverted a key element of the framers' plan for avoiding tyranny. Sorry to throw this back to your undergraduate days, but that was the primary goal of the framers, to prevent tyranny. And the focus was executive tyranny. I'm going to hit the same stuff. That's why the article outlining presidential powers is short. The one on Congress is long. That fear arose naturally out of King George III and the experience with colonial governors. That kind of tyranny was close to home, okay? The framers intended the Senate particularly to stand against that kind of executive tyranny. And this is the thing that we may have touched on really briefly, but I want to kind of hammer home. The framers tried to design the institutions, again, primarily the Senate, so that members of Congress would feel special about being there, that it was an honor to be there. Remember, initially you're electing senators through state legislatures. So you were not picked by ordinary schlubs, ordinary citizens. These were members of your state legislature, elites who chose you to serve in the US Senate. The framers hoped that you would then develop that feeling of specialness that would lead you to have a real intense loyalty to your institution. That part of feeling special was you felt special because it was the Senate you belonged to. They take pride in the Senate. They take pleasure in the sort of exalted place that it has in our political system. And they would become angered at any presidential attempt to amass power, to move toward tyranny. And remember that at the same time, there was the hope that political parties would not form. Okay? Their factions are inevitable, but the hope and their calculus was, and it's because they thought about factions forming generally over more concrete kinds of interests, that they'd be more fragmented, so that you would have real difficulties in assembling a majority faction, okay? Partisan polarization and cohesion subverted those arrangements by substituting partisan loyalty for institutional loyalty. It didn't increase significantly under Trump, but its meaning did. It got worse because it was not really fealty, loyalty to their party. It was fealty and loyalty to Trump as an individual. That's far more dangerous. Okay. They simply responded to Donald Trump. And to repeat an earlier point, again, that would work even more powerfully for lots of House Republicans because their districts are smaller, more homogeneous. Some of that's unavoidable. as the parties seem to residentially segregate, and increasingly Republicans are in overwhelmingly rural kinds of districts, and suburban and urban areas are increasingly solidly Democratic. Well, then it gets hard to draw the lines. And indeed, most scholarship that's out there right now, although you certainly want to put an end to gerrymandering, says that the greater problem comes from residential segregation. Okay. What seemed to change House Republicans' calculus was when their butts were on the line physically. When rioters start storming the Capitol, and you might be who they're looking to hang, all of a sudden they got religion. That was enough. That was enough to spur the critical reaction that you saw. So you get the House impeachment on the January 13th, and you get 10 Republicans going on, and enough that in these days it amounts to a bipartisan bipartisan move. I'm going to give you an idea of how hard it is to.
But Pat,
Yeah.
could you address why only 10?
Oh, that's kind of, I'm going to give you a historical example that'll kind of illustrate how that this isn't different. It's not that different. And that's if you take a look at Nixon's impeachment. There were 5 articles of impeachment. This never goes to the House as a whole, right? He gives up the game before it goes there. So among Republicans, what the hell? I'm going to hit these one at a time. On Nixon, Article 1 for impeachment was obstruction of justice, and 6 Republicans aye, 11 Republicans nay. I'm going to note the evidence was astoundingly overwhelming that he had obstructive justice. And still, you only got 6 out of 17 Republicans voting for that. Article 2, abuse of presidential power. Again, abundant evidence on that one. 7 Republicans on the Judiciary Committee vote aye, 10 nay. Article 3, contempt of Congress. Only 2 voted aye, 15 nay. And on the final 2 articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, the secret bombing of Cambodia that he lied about, and violations of the Emoluments Clause, you didn't get a single Republican on the Judiciary Committee voting for those. This is, in part, go back to what I said about party leadership. Okay, you see your role as supporting your party's president. It has to be just overwhelming evidence to move the needle even a little bit. Given the culture within the party, given the culture within the institution, even before you get partisan polarization and that really, really strong partisan cohesion. Well, these House Republicans now have those additional forces. It's much more difficult for them now to go along with this. Further, they've already quickly walked past the first impeachment. They want to put that behind them as quickly as they possibly can. There's an understanding that each time you do that, you weaken your party as well. Okay, so it's always going to be very, very difficult. I cannot imagine the circumstances where you would get a majority of the president's party voting for impeachment. No matter what they did. Those forces are just too strong. Does that help a little bit, Ann?
Yeah, and Pat, I have a question because in the old days, and I don't remember exactly when it was, I remember there were a few votes, I don't know, it might have been around the Iraq War and otherwise, where there was this concept that party leadership, and I remember it on the Democratic side, but I don't remember on the Republican side, but it may have been the case where leadership said this is a vote of conscience, not.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, how does that play on both the Dem and the Republican side, which was essentially, we're not going to hem you in by your party. This is a vote of your conscience.
Yeah. I think that's going to come up when we get to the Senate now, that's a possibility. But I think that's likely to occur when party leadership takes a look at the situation and says, this is going to be really hard. This is going to be really, really hard for a bunch of folks in our membership. And maybe we as leadership can't even agree on this. So go ahead and vote your conscience.
But how often, Pat, has that actually happened over the years?
Well, it's been
a couple times.
I think the change that's occurred has been more the leadership saying you need to vote with the party on this one. And yeah, I don't think you have many votes of conscience these days.
I haven't heard it in a long time, but it used to be a bit of a thing where the party leadership just sort of, in a way, rose above and said, the issues are so significant, and like you said, maybe there's not a consensus. We released you from your commitment to vote based on party.
Yeah,
it was sort of a good thing, I thought.
Someone mentioned in the comments here that McConnell said that the voting for your conscience said that for the upcoming vote as well. And they think that some of the Republicans are afraid of the fringe on the right of voting against Trump. So they may be wanting to vote for their conscience, but having that being primaried or want to keep their job, et cetera, et cetera. We know that. So
yeah, because
I think
that's the most important thing, getting reelected, not their oath to the Constitution. Got it.
But I would say that it would be interesting to have this conversation had the first impeachment trial not occurred. I think that they were my opinion has been that they were trying to apply the same standards of the legal definition of impeachment, et cetera, to the second impeachment trial as well. And they were being called out by their constituents if they had indicated they were more going to lean towards impeachment this time around or vote with their conscience. Why the shift? So they were, for the Republicans that I follow and that I observe even just to see how they're reacting, it was all very much on a legal basis. This is not adhere to the legal definition of impeachment. Their thing was, this is not grounds for impeachment. Impeachment is for other things. It exists. It's for a reason, but my vote is my conscience. My vote is the legal conscience. This is not adhering to the law, which is the same argument that they had for the first impeachment hearing. So I think that they were trying to stay within what they had boxed themselves into for the first. So my observation would be, it would be different if the first impeachment didn't happen. Maybe, we'll see.
Well, let me.
Somebody said Mitt Romney voted his conscience in the first impeachment. Yes.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive either. I mean, you could vote your conscience and it could be what the party wants. The other thing is that you do want to, voting your conscience, it's pretty funny because you essentially have set up sort of two different forces. You could vote your conscience or you could go with the party leadership. Well, you know, when they're voting their conscience could be, I'm going to do what my constituents want me to do. Well, and then we vilify that because, oh, you're just worried about reelection. Well, you know, anyway, let me go through. I actually have data. I have data. You know, I love data to throw up here. So we're going to once again try to. We're going to see if this works. Oh, come on. Oh, I have to do screen sharing. Michelle, it says it's disabled.
Try again.
Okay. Can folks see it? I'm going to walk you through this, all right? Is everybody good? Okay. So these are the 10 representatives who voted for impeachment. And I think one of the things that you got from journalists who were doing stories on this was that, oh my God, they're all over the board. There's no sense to be made. Well, bullshit. There are a couple of interesting cases, but for 8 of the 10, it's not all that surprising that they were willing to support impeachment. First, I'm sorry, hopefully everybody can see this. I've put the 2016 vote is that representatives vote. 2016 Trump is the percentage Trump got in their district. 2018 is the representative, 2020 is the representative, 2020 is the Trump. Almost without exception, they outperformed Trump in their district. So that's for starters. That doesn't mean that you have no threat of getting primaried, but you're certainly stronger than those representatives whom Trump had outperformed in their district. Second, with those 2 exceptions, these are some of the most liberal Republicans in the House. And I'm going to now go, this is that column, their ideology score. This is a measure that's been developed. It's a totally awesome measure of ideology, which there are actually a couple of dimensions, but the first dimension of this scale accounts for the most variation. It's comparable. You can compare these scores over time, which is incredibly cool because it's taking into account the fact that you have different agendas in place at different points in time. And they've also applied it to presidents. And I think I even tossed that in an earlier class. So if you take here, the lower the score, the closer it is to 0, the more liberal the representative's voting record happens to be. Okay. So with the exception of Tom Rice right there and Liz Cheney, these are some of the more liberal Republicans. I'm going to give you their rank in the House, okay, in terms of how liberal they happen to be. Katko from New York was ranked number 4, Valadeo number 6, Kinzinger 9, Gonzalez 14, Little Freddie Upton 23, Newhouse 26, Herrera Butler 29, and then you get Cheney and Rice, who are the really interesting scores there. The folks, this is called a DW nominate score. If you want to take a look at this stuff, the website it's easy to remember. It's VoteView. I think voteview.org. Well, they can then take that measure and use it to predict a given vote. So if you take a look here, Katko from New York had a 39% chance of voting in favor of impeachment. That's not bad. Okay. Kinzinger, 24%. Some of them were lower, but only Cheney and Rice were there, and Valadao and Meyer didn't have enough votes to calculate the score. Okay. So the two things are Liz Cheney and Tom Rice. Okay. Liz Cheney's dad is Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney hates Donald Trump's ass. He hates him. He just hates him. And Dick Cheney is one of those kinds of characters who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room all the time. He speaks frequently with his daughter, Liz. And I'm sure he's a very persuasive individual. On the other side, she's number 3 in the House Republican leadership. That means, and your role there is to support your party's president. So that's an interesting, challenging thing. It's one of the reasons that media focused on Liz Cheney. On the other, she's absolutely invulnerable in Wyoming. She's solid there. Tom Rice is the really interesting case there. I mean, South Carolina is the worst. It's just, there are reasons that's where the Civil War started, right? That's, let's see if I have any. I have to. This is my complaint about the budget for the St. Mary's Library. We no longer have access to Congressional Quarterly, so I couldn't look up their presidential support scores. The librarian sent me a map of the the layout of the Notre Dame Library, pointing me to where I could find the print copy of the Congressional Quarterly Almanac. Okay, here's another anomaly I thought you might find interesting. Trump only endorsed one of these clowns, Newhouse in Washington, for no clear reason. He's one of the more liberal members in the House. I have no idea, but it obviously didn't buy him anything with Newhouse. Okay, and we'll stop. I'm sorry. The other piece there, their party loyalty. If you'll notice, most of these are significantly less than the general party loyalty score, which is up in the mid-90s. Okay. All right.
So Pat, I worked for Upton a long time ago, but my theory is that he has always been less beholden to special interests because he is independently wealthy and therefore does not need to be.
He's I hate to put it this way for our Republican friends, but he's just a very nice. I've met Fred Upton. He's just a really nice,
he is nice.
meek guy. He's really short. He's a tiny little
Yes.
dude. I met him at a conference at the Acorn Theater.
Oh, the Acorn! I know the Acorn.
He really, I think you're right, Carla. I don't know if it's so much the money. That's just sort of his orientation. He doesn't have tons of ambition. He's a guy who goes to work and does his job.
It's saying something that I interned there. So, I mean, that's been a number of years now since I could say I was an intern. And he's still there. So he's been in office a long time.
Yeah, he's one of those in the old language. He's a workhorse, not a show horse.
Mm-hmm.
No, um, he's a pretty decent guy. Actually, the concert at the Acorn was there was a guy who lived in the district and had a very popular restaurant, and immigration kept trying to deport him. There were claims he
Oh
was
yeah,
involved
I know
in
about
terrorism.
him.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was all pretty bogus. Upton crusaded for this guy.
Yeah, which
He
was
was
really good.
incredibly supportive and incredibly decent in the way that
Mm-hmm.
that he dealt with that. Okay.
Pat, someone asked if the Trump endorsement was for the primary or for the general election.
I think the endorsements came before the general and before the primary.
Okay.
I would have to double check the date on that, but usually he didn't endorse anybody for the primary unless they weren't the incumbent. He would endorse insurgent candidates. So even if it came afterwards, and I don't think Newhouse faced any opposition in the primary, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Okay, on to the Senate for the fun stuff, because now we get to make up stuff because it hasn't happened yet. I'm going to cut to the chase. Mitch McConnell's key. Like you don't know that already. If any of you can lay your hands on it, I highly recommend a profile of McConnell that Jane Mayer did. It's in the New Yorker. She does some of the best investigative journalism around right now, and it's in the New Yorker, and it's called The Enabler in Chief. I've only read part of it, but I caught, this is something else you can get, and this is where you'll find the little episode that I'm going to describe. If you're familiar with Terry Gross and Fresh Air, it's one of the best. She's one of the best interviewers around, and she had Jane Mayer on to talk about the article about McConnell, and that's available as like a podcast. You can catch that. So Mayer asked, she asked Mayer, is there anything that McConnell stands for? Are there like principles that drive him? And you know, for all of the cynical treatment of folks in Congress, often there's a real goal, there's a value, there's some kind of principle that provides a driving force for these folks. So she asked, you know, in doing your interviews, did you learn what that principle, what that driving force would be? And Mayer said, and she's like a real journalist, so she interviewed lots and lots and lots of people. She said, no one could ever identify any principle that McConnell really cared about. Except personal advancement and wealth. Including, and I love it that this is public, including his choice of a spouse. That he had confided to this individual that Elaine Chao, who came from incredible wealth, he was going to marry her because that had moved his career forward. Okay? He didn't have any principles. That made it easier for him to cooperate with Trump all along. He didn't care. The only way that Trump ticked him off was when Trump's ineptitude and erratic behavior would make it difficult for him to get things done. A key observation, an easy observation, that's all over now. Okay. So I think that Republican senators are just waiting to see how much freedom, leash he's going to give. They're going to continue what he has to say is going to hold an awful great weight. He's a vengeful kind of dude. McConnell isn't a warm and fuzzy guy. The other little story about McConnell lay out here before we can open it up. The fact that the Russell building there is named after Richard Russell, a notorious bigot and racist. After McCain died, there was a brief movement to rename it after McCain. McConnell stepped on that right away. He still carried a grudge against mavericky John McCain, who had also had not much use for McConnell. So I think those Republican senators know that McConnell still has power, and they're going to wait to see what his reaction happens to be. One more thing there is, I just kind of went through the Senate membership and where they're from. There aren't many Republican senators from competitive states. They're mostly in like bovine states, where there's more cattle than human beings. You have a small number. You got Portman in Ohio. Who is it in Pennsylvania? Come on, he's been in the news. Help me out here, guys. Toomey. And I have no idea what the hell to make of Ron Johnson. Tellingly, those were key states that went for Trump in 2016, and 2 of the 3 didn't go there in 2020. But that's only like a couple of votes there. It's difficult to see, if you're a Republican senator from Oklahoma, you can vote your conscience all you want. If you're paying attention to your constituency, those are folks who are ardent Trump fans, and they don't want you to do that. Consequently, I can't see the Senate voting to convict. I can't see the supermajority. They have to get, I think, like 17. I don't see how they get 17. So, I mean, I think McConnell would have to be really strong for impeachment for that to work.
So
And
Pat,
I'm not sure that's going to happen.
From McConnell, like, what's the basis of his power now? Does it sort of revert back to the influence and power that he had under Obama? Because he's not going to appeal to the Trump people, I don't think.
No.
So is it going to just revert back to where it was? That's the basis? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But if you're the minority or the majority leader, you have a great deal of power within your party.
Is the normal that we're talking about there, I'm going to make Trump a one-term president, or is it let's potentially work together to maybe pass one bill?
I'm not even going to go that far in the future. Maybe I should have worn my "Just Say Niet to Moscow Mitch" t-shirt tonight if I'd known the role there. It's hard for me to imagine Mitch working with. I don't see it. I just don't see it. Well, let me finish this up so that I can open up for you guys, okay? So I actually think that it's more likely that you will see them ending up after the trial for impeachment fails, going for Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Here's the beauty of that. It's not simply that you don't need a supermajority. You just need a majority, and then you can bar him from ever holding federal office again. Here's the beauty. All of those Republicans could then vote against it. Go back to their constituent, and a bunch of them have to know that he deserves to be impeached. Okay? But they would find it difficult in their districts to take that stand. This lets them have their cake and eat it too. They can vote against that, knowing that the outcome will be, we'll never have to deal with him again. So that my dissertation advisor told me never to make projections, but that's my guess. That's my guess. So I would.
So Pat,
what about you folks?
Pat, is the Section 3 of the 14th barring him from running for office again? What is that? If you can refresh my memory.
It can't be. That's the incitement to insurrection. Here's the poetic.
Oh, okay.
Here's the poetic justice here. It was designed to deal with traitors of the Confederacy, racist bigots. What more fitting object than Donald Trump? It's
Right.
perfect. It's just.
But then you mentioned they can separately vote on him never holding office again. Yes.
Well, that will be part of that vote. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Pat. I know it's when they finally get to the conviction vote for Trump, it's 2/3 of the Senate that's present, right? Do you see a difference between voting against or just happening to be out of the office that day and lowering that?
Yeah, they're not. Nobody's gonna be out of the office that day.
I was wondering what you thought that difference might be.
Yeah, and you've got to. I mean, I think, again, I don't do the constitutional law thing, but I think it's not 2/3 of those presidents, 2/3 period. You've got to get, but they're all there. It's in a sense, it's an academic point because they're all going to be there.
Someone typed in, I'm curious what Lindsey Graham is going to do with regards to impeachment. He gave his Dear John speech, but then said impeachment was too much.
Maybe they can do a separate vote on Lindsey Graham. What do you think? What a despicable, worthless.
South Carolinian.
Yeah. We could do a whole night on why South Carolina is a horrible political. He's not going to support it. He's not going to vote for any of those things. It's in that case, South Carolina is just an incredibly conservative, reactionary place. It may be, I've never been there. I hear it's pretty, but
On the coast is pretty, but
yeah,
the rest of it.
yeah. Greenville's okay.
Well, actually, no, Greenville's a little up and coming in terms of like complete streets and all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, in general, it's I have relatives there. I've been there, and it's just I don't know.
So Pat, I've got a question about kind of what comes from here. Does the Senate have to actually convict in order for the consequences that everybody hypothetically puts in place actually happen? Right? So if Trump can't be barred from running for office again if he's not convicted first. Is that right?
Well, he'd have to, there are two routes. Our shared community goal here is Trump no longer holds federal office. Am I right? So there are two ways to get there. One is to convict him of impeachment and then separately say, okay, we're going to vote on the penalty. And you know, all you have left is barring him from some sort of office. So that's one avenue you can take. The other avenue is 14th Amendment, the Section 3 of that. And I think that's just a single vote, you know, and if that passes, then he's out of there.
Well, if that's the case, why don't the Democrats go right to that? Because frankly, there's a lot of business that needs to get done. Just
no, I know. But impeachment has a symbolic significance. I think it was also we can tag this jerk with the only president to be impeached twice. I think that was attractive to folks, and I think the sort of impeachment has this incredible symbolic significance in our politics that that the 14th Amendment doesn't have. And if
I guess it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So I think from my perspective, the most important thing is if you could send a message to deter others who others Trump-like people who want to come into office. Because basically Trump has outlined a path now for governing or not governing to become president that was not, I think,
campaigning
originally envisioned. And so I think the danger is he's sort of shown, and you alluded to this earlier, Pat, that if you can get yourself elected and you don't really care about any of this stuff, you can still, quote, be in office and, quote, be successful and pose a real threat. So how do you deter that?
Well, that's really hard.
Yeah.
You do have, I mean, this is the conversation that's going on right now, right? Is there's Trump and then there's Trumpism. And there were forces that made Trump possible, and a bunch of those forces aren't going away. And in a number of cases, there's constitutionally nothing you can do about it. And so that's really hard. I think that the main goal is hitting Trump as hard as you possibly could. And impeachment is a symbolically more, it has more symbolic weight than the 14th Amendment. And so it was like, bam, we're going to hit him with that. They're not looking beyond into the future about how do we stop characters like this in the future, in part because it's too hard and it's not clear how you would do that. I mean, it's a danger confronting the Republic now. You've sort of, you know, you've
right.
Let the genie
Leslie
out of the
just
bottle.
said the genie is out of the bottle. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's
my goodness. The three of us came up with the same phrase all at once.
So Pat, why then has Nancy Pelosi not sent the articles over yet to the Senate first? What's the strategy? And second, I know, and Mitch McConnell said today that he wants to give Trump and his team 2 weeks to work on their defense before he brings it, before the trial starts. You know, and I get Mitch McConnell can control a lot of things still, because if it's about the budget, obviously you need a super majority of the senators to pass bills. But in this case, I don't understand why we give a rat's ass what Mitch McConnell says about 2 weeks. Can you tell me what that all means?
You have two things there, right? There are a number of things that are coming into play for Pelosi. One is to recognize that Biden's doing an amazing job right now of hitting the ground running. There's like so much going on right now, and getting folks confirmed in the Senate and moving that forward. It's the scheduling thing that's presented problems. Like, how do we do all of these things at one time? And they can say cute little things like, "Whoa, we can walk and chew gum at the same time." But there are only so many hours in the day and limited resources. It's not easy. And Pelosi wants to defer to Biden. Not sort of lay down and say, whatever you want to do, Joe, but an awareness that she needs to empower Joe Biden. It's really important to give him all the support you possibly can, because she's a bright woman. She knows how much has to be done to fix all of the horribleness that Trump put in place. And the second thing, and so I think that's she's holding back a little bit. What was the second thing about McConnell?
Why is Mitch McConnell today said that he wants to wait 2 weeks, so that at least 2 weeks, so that Trump can get his defense team together and they can prepare for a trial?
Let me be cynical, okay? Because we all know they're not wearing any clothes. Don't we know that? They're not wearing any clothes. Like, you don't need a damn trial. This is, it's all out there in plain sight, right? But McConnell has been laying the foundation for saying, no, we have to be paused. We have to do the trial. We have to make sure we get evidence. And that wasn't bad. I've never done Mitch McConnell. That's my premier performance.
I was gonna say, that's the Scotch talking.
No. This is too damn good for Mitch McConnell. This is cover your ass time. Okay. Remember, McConnell's not terribly popular in Kentucky. He's struggled to get reelected a few times. He's been there forever, but he doesn't go in easily, and that's one of the consequences. Folks who took my Congress course may remember this. If you aspire to power like McConnell did, you potentially run into problems with reelection, because the exercise of power may lead you to do things that aren't popular back in your state or in your district.
But Pat, he just got reelected.
But he's barely winning. He's not winning big. It's Kentucky.
Oh, I know, but I mean, his opponent was right on, but he still couldn't do it.
Okay, but how old is he? Is he really going to run again in 6 years?
Oh, look at these old people. They're never going to give up. They're just going to keep on. I'm sorry. The age of the people in the Senate is pathetic.
That man will die in office.
But did you guys watch during the impeachment? They all had to walk up and sign the book. They're old people. Like, it's
what was with him when he had all of the different, he was molting and he had the bruises, and I thought for sure he had COVID and he was keeping it quiet and he was going to die in 3 weeks. Oh my gosh.
I'm going to repeat. How many of you have been to Kentucky?
I have. It's crazy. It's
If
crazy
you've been
there.
to Kentucky, you understand. This is just like a really, I get it. Indiana, my best friend lives in Kentucky. My phrase is Indiana is the Mississippi of the Midwest, but we can only have that label because Kentucky isn't really in the Midwest. But it is so overwhelmingly right-wing gun culture, all of that kind of thing, that if you're a Republican and you can't beat the pants off Jesus Christ, you're you're worthless. He's barely winning. He is vulnerable. Okay, in a state where no Republican should ever be vulnerable on the statewide level. So I think what he's doing, who knows how much longer he wants to stay there, but he's laying the groundwork for trying to present his vote in favor of impeachment, if he goes there, as reasonable. This is prudential, precautionary maneuvering by Mitch McConnell. You know, we're reasonable people. We follow the law. We follow the procedures. Da 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 da. That's what he's doing right now. Yeah, I still have no idea how my friend.
Yeah, you weren't seeing the chat about Strom Thurmond.
Yeah. And the turtles comment, but let's keep it above board, ladies. Come on now. We did not talk about people dying and live how long they're gonna live. Let's I'm gonna call it there. What else was I gonna say? We'll see if anybody else had anybody else have any observations that they're seeing as we kind of close out here at 9:10ish.
It's gonna be one of our shorter versions.
I had something that was super interesting that I was kind of like thinking about and listening to, how like you saw Ted Cruz and like Holly coming forward on like their soapboxes about like the election results and like they're going to object to them. And that was like, I guess it's like that wasn't necessarily everything that happened with the Capitol riot, but that was really kind of like the talking points that you could contribute to that day's events at least. And the only reason why, like Ted Cruz has a Harvard law degree, like he knows that the election was legit. Like he knows that there is no like court, like 55 court cases came through and didn't find anything wrong with the results. So they're doing that because they want to appeal to Trump's base when they run in 2024, because they've seen this political machine that has like taken place. Yet impeaching him and preventing him from running in 2024, you get rid of him. Now, like you still want his endorsement because he's going to be campaigning for these people. Like he's not going
to win. Donald Trump won't endorse anybody but Donald Trump.
But you don't think that he's going to be doing like campaign events for other people, like these other right-wing people in the future? Really? Wow. See, because
you underestimate just how narcissistic he is. Like I was in New York when he was kind of in his New York prime, and he was just this incredible joke because everybody recognized the narcissism. It's all about himself. It's all about
I think that it's just like getting rid of him where he's not able to run for office again. Like there's that door open.
And that's exactly the beauty of just letting things go and let Democrats do it. All that goes down the pike. You clear Trump away so he can't run in 2024. And Cruz and Hawley and that despicable Mike Pompeo, they can all then kind of jockey over that support. And like, they're all elitists. But on the other hand,
but where are his supporters going to go? Like, what are they going to do? What's the future for Cruz?
Well,
I mean,
I think
Cruz was against him. Cruz got booed at the RNC in 2016.
Yeah, but ever since he's been licking his never mind.
Oh yeah, he's like obsessed with Trump.
I'm going to be somewhat I'm gonna give you an image because there's like what's going to happen to his supporters. I think a large number of them will crawl under the rock from which they came.
Well, I think the supporters, yes. I just meant the congressmen who were so vocal in support of him.
Oh.
What are they going to do?
Well, it's you're going to continue to see. I would like to say Republican Party leadership is going to move away from that, but they're still terrified of getting primaried. They're terrified. And it's not, remember that this started with the Tea Party. Didn't start with Trump, it started with the Tea Party. Primarying more reasonable, moderate Republicans. They're going to continue to be timid about moving away from that. And I think you'll continue to see them engage in, the voter ID stuff and making it more difficult to vote, so that you can kind of stand in the way of all the demographic forces that are moving away from them. I would like to be more hopeful about this, but I'm just not. And what you're seeing coming out of the House and the Senate right now on the part of things that Republicans are saying don't give me any hope. That there's no sense of repentance. There's no sense that they need to disavow Trump. And I know I said the last time, you're not going to see anybody rejecting Trump. That's like suicide. But it doesn't look hopeful. Doesn't look good.
And I just would suggest that some of those folks are going to take their slap on the wrist from ethics, filings that have been done around their behavior, take their slap on the wrist, and they'll move forward. They'll continue to believe that this was just a blip on what they've been doing, and keep on moving forward. It's a sad piece, but I just don't think that their involvement rose enough to the top. Everybody was so big on trying to pin it all on Trump that the co-conspirators in the Congress still were technically victims that day. So there's an easy out, right? For them to be truly held accountable for what they did to stoke the fire. That's just my own 2 cents.
Yeah. Makes sense. It makes sense. Everybody's chatting, nobody's talking. You cowards.
It probably means the recording needs to be turned off, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking that too. Do we want to stop it here?
Does that work, guys?
Well,
Okay.
we were just talking about the Lincoln Project and how, now that that group is in the majority, I mean, how effective are they going to be? And I brought up the indivisible group as well, how they very succinctly, targeted their own, the constituents targeted their own representative sort of thing. I think the Lincoln Project more so than the indivisible group, they've been to the precipice. They've seen how bad it is, and I think Lincoln Project's going to continue fighting more so possibly than indivisible. Some people might lose steam now that Biden is in the presidency, but I think that pressure still needs to be on there because I mean that majority are thin and there's so much to lose. Look what happened in the last 4 years.
Yeah. If they can start generating candidacies, I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to replace membership. You just have to do that. But let me do the historical example. You had to get rid of all those Southern Democrats before the Democratic Party could fully embrace civil rights. You had to get rid of them. As long as they were there, they were going to stand in the way of voting rights and civil rights. You just had to get rid of them. Well, I think that's what's going to happen on the Republican side. You have to get rid of those folks. The difficult part is a Democrat first has to beat them. and again, because of these homogeneous districts, that's not easy. It's hard. They're more homogeneous geographically than they were there in the late 60s, early 70s, when you finally booted the Southern Democrats out of the party and they moved into the Republican Party.
If on the opposite political spectrum, if you haven't seen the Netflix special on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all of the women of that, I'm racking my brain trying to think of that particular movement.
Bringing Down the House is what that was called.
What's it called again, Sarah?
Bringing Down the House.
Bringing Down the House. It really gives a great insider's look on what it took for that particular movement, which is gaining ground on that organization, the name's escaping me, is to support, find candidates, bring them to local districts, support them, what that needs to get done, and the amount of loss, like in the sense of they have to run so many times. There's kind of this understanding, like, AOC's on the phone with someone and was like, look, it's going to take 99 of us to lose for one of us to go forward. And so that understanding on the grassroots level, I thought was really fascinating. And so definitely I recommend Bringing Down the House on Netflix.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Here's the difficult thing for the Republicans, is that what you're asking is for more, it's not even ideology, right? But some of it is. You're trying to get rid of the real extremists within your party. Well, that's the opposite of what AOC has in mind. She wants to get more progressive folks in office on the Democratic side. That's easier than bringing a more moderate, either on the Democratic or the Republican side. And that's become increasingly more difficult for both parties. So that's fine. AOC and all of those folks, you got a noticeably more progressive. You also got a much more diverse set of office holders as well. Far better representation of women than in the past. It's great, but it was also from the opposite kind of direction than you're going to need occurring in the Republican Party. It's easier to do what they did than what we're talking about Republicans needing to do.
Yeah, Pat, that makes sense. Yeah. I think Georgia's a case example, though, of how to bring in new candidates, into office. I mean, it's happening here. And I mean, Stacey Abrams and many others laid the groundwork for getting more people involved, and they're building the infrastructure, which is a model for Democrats, but is it a model for what the Republicans can do? I don't really know. I haven't thought about it in that way, but it's more participation, it's better participation, it's better candidates.
Yeah. And I don't see any since 2000. So this is for 20 years. The mantra on the Republican side has been, we just need to get out the vote. We don't need to appeal to sort of a broader, we don't need to pay attention to the increased diversity of the United States. We don't need to pay attention to the fact that women are, we don't need to pay attention. All we need to do is get out our voters like crazy. And Karl Rove did such an amazing job that became the template for all these folks. And I made this point earlier. Politicians are tactically conservative animals. It's going to take a Republican who takes a big risk to chart that different path. And in the way that somebody already mentioned there, it's probably going to take a couple of times. It's not going to be 2024 and you get to change your 2028. It's going to be like a series of elections to get you there.
But Pat, there were failed attempts on the Republican side, but like, wasn't it George Bush who talked about the need to diversify the party? And I mean, there have been a couple of Republicans who've come out and said that, and it didn't ever come to fruition. But there were a few voices. Wasn't it George Bush?
But they
didn't fall through, but there was this concept that the demographics are changing in the country.
Right.
And then it was kind of summarily or whatever rejected. But there have been a few voices.
Yeah, but they never sincerely tried it.
But in addition to that, they've been talking about how they have to decide who they are now. Are they Trumpists, or are they more of the conservative principles that predated Trump? But do you really think that's going to happen? Or they're not very introspective group?
Well, and you also don't get, you don't get coherent leadership until you win the presidency. It's going to take that really to move the country forward. We need a Republican president who moves beyond all that.
Right.
You don't want them to look like the Democrats. They need to have a distinct vision, but it's got to be different. It's got to be different from Trump, and I think it has to move beyond. Let's be straightforward. Some of the bigotry and sexism that really has dominated the Republican Party. You can be conservative and not bigoted. You can be conservative and not sexist. You can be conservative and move that party so that it becomes a viable party for the future. It's just, I don't know that I see any. Does anybody see a Republican in the Senate or anywhere that or in a governor's office where you go, this is the person who can move the party in that direction?
I was saying in the chat, I was raised Republican. The last good Republican I can think of off the top of my head is Jim Edgar from Illinois, which was a long time ago.
It was.
Fiscal conservatism was the bedrock that I was taught by my grandparents. My grandparents raised me. And, when I was coming of age, it was during the Bush years. And I was webpage in 2004 because my birthday was October 25th and I was at a rally for Bush getting elected the second time. And I said I was going to vote for him because I was Republican. And they were talking about youth voters and all this sort of jazz. But, you turn around and you look, and we talk about fiscal conservatism, and there was the tax cuts, and and then there was the war. And those two things hand in hand is kind of what pushed me out of, what did the Republicans stand for at that point, And, sure, they're pro-life, but from a Catholic perspective, they're pro-life in the abortion sense. Are they pro-life in any other sense? And that's what caused me to leave the Republican Party.
Yeah.
What is that, when you distill Republicanism, what is that, and how has it been shown in those concrete steps that the Republicans have taken over the last however many years.
Yeah, God, I don't know. I think I do have, well, maybe I don't have any folks who took the class on Reagan. But that's where things go south for the Republican Party.
So some of us were talking about Hogan from Maryland. Governor Hogan.
Yeah. I think a couple of interesting alternatives have popped up there. And I guess I was going to point out, and Sarah pointed out, I think, some rocks and shoals that this kind of Republican who's going to rebuild the party has to avoid. And I know this, and the supply side stuff is just complete nonsense, and everybody knows that it's complete nonsense. But getting rid of the sort of strong ideological kind of the emphasis on negative freedom that I played around with last time, and the morality politics needs to kind of recede into the background, because those, and that was tied to the religious right coming in to support Republicans. Those things are going to get in the way for a Republican who wants to move their party forward from the presidency. And they're, certainly something like fiscal conservatism could be one of those pillars upon which they could build.
Yeah, but we haven't seen a fiscal conservative.
Okay, can I jump in here?
Since the 70s or the 80s. I mean,
yeah.
Reagan wasn't a fiscal conservative.
Right.
So I don't know how they argue that they're fiscal conservative. I mean, if they want to rebuild and retool, but.
So I have said, oh, Adrian, you got me. So I don't know if you remember. So we had this more or less this conversation like a couple of sessions ago, and Adrian and I kind of popped a couple names out, and you can revisit that if you want on YouTube. So I will say two things. Sarah, you and I definitely can connect offline regarding Catholicism and Republicanism, because I think conservative values, because for me, they go hand in hand as a very strong Catholic and as a moderate Republican, anti-Trumper, and very proud of that. And I will always be very proud of that. But I've always said since the very beginning, even when we started these sessions, is that I really, really feel that Nikki Haley is positioned herself well to take this ball and run with it. I think that I've said before that if there was going to be a woman president, that it would not come from the Democrat side. It would come from the Republican side, to gain that middle ground. I think that that's the only way that this country can really move forward over that, hump of we need a woman president, and conservative supporters will help that. I think also is that she did her time as a Trump. She served at the pleasure of the president. She was asked to serve. She did her time, but she could read the tea leaves, and she knew when she could get out in time to say, I served Trump. I have his support. But she also went toe to toe with him. If you remember that, what was that famous line of hers? Oh, sweetheart, or something like that. Leslie, you tell me what it is.
I'm not confused.
Not, yeah, I don't get confused, but there was another one. It's like, oh, that sweetheart, or something like that. So that's kind of like putting him down a little bit in his place. I think that she's gone toe to toe with him enough. Her book is fabulous, I will say, by the way, if you read it. And bless his heart. Perfect. Thanks, Leslie. That's perfect. So, and I really do think that she has positioned her well. She was on the stump. She was stumping for various candidates along the way. She did her time in Georgia. She stumped along the way. But even her lack of response, which I was very upset about the Capitol riots, etc. I thought she was playing it strategically in her mind, smart to be able to position herself for a future run. So I've always said it, and maybe we'll find out in 2 years whether or not, especially if Biden makes it very clear that, he's going to be 82 and that Harris, he gives his endorsement to his vice president. Wouldn't it be apropos of the GOP to say, no, you will not get the first woman president. We will get the first woman president, especially someone who can continue the Trump train, so to speak, or at least be Trumpian enough to get some of that initial support. So that's my.
She's certainly, she is certainly, it's been clear that she's been angling for the gig. I want to remind all of you that the Republican Party doesn't really exist and the Democratic Party doesn't really exist. That if you're going to get the nomination, it's primary voters. And right now, Republican primary voters, they're not the biggest feminists in the world. So she's going to have an uphill road, and she also, and the number of characters who have been angling to come in after Trump, my bet is you're going to have a whole bunch of characters running for the nomination, and then it becomes the same difficult strategic situation that you saw the Republicans face in 2016. It's hard then finding a wide enough niche that can help you get a good start in the primary season and then build on that later. But Michelle, you're absolutely right. She's been doing everything strategically to pave the way. And certainly, if you are interested in running for the Republican nomination for president in 2024, you are not calling out Trump on the riot right now. You're not. This has happened the entire time Trump's been in office. The only Republicans who called him out were folks who were going to be leaving office or who had already left office. There were no profiles in courage out there.
I get all this, but I have to say at some level, like if people don't call this out in terms of the threat to democracy and our Constitution, what are they going to call it out? It's morally bankrupt. I get it. I get the political analysis. I get what people are doing. But like, if they're not willing to stand up and say this was wrong, where are we as a country morally? Yeah. I don't care who did this. It was Trump or a Democrat. There's got to be a line in the sand. And where I don't see the Republicans speaking out. It's like, oh, I'm worried about re-election. Okay, I get it. But really, is this what's going to save our republic?
Yeah.
And I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned because I think you're just going to have copycats.
I know.
Sorry, I had to just say that. I'll stop.
No, I know. Look, we all kind of want to crusade at this point, right? Just like, but it's, this is my role as like killing everyone's dreams. It ain't going to happen.
I'm afraid you're right.
It's going to happen through more indirect kinds of processes, which is why I said, I think 14th Amendment, Section 3, that's the way everybody can make him go away and like pretend it never happened.
I actually think there's a longer term gain, but it's probably, I don't even know if it's in my lifetime, but if you look, forget the conspiracy theory stuff, the QAnon. There are a lot of folks who voted for Trump who are feeling a lot of pain about where we are economically with the country and that are not uncommon with how many Democrats of similar socioeconomic status are feeling. Okay. And I saw it when there were Bernie voters who went to Trump, right? Because it was the populist message, right? So it's much more of a grassroots thing, but like, could some politician, some political party, some group pull those threads together with those people? And it's a long-term proposition to meet those basic needs that from a policy standpoint, those groups can't articulate their commonality, but I think there's a lot of commonality about some of the policy fixes that could improve the lives of all these folks.
Yeah. The problem is that Bernie and Trump motivated folks exactly the same way.
But I'm not even talking moving forward about the Bernie and Trump. I'm saying we have people in this country at the lower end of the socioeconomic and racial and ethnic who are suffering.
Right.
And many of them don't know why. And there are policies that could alleviate that. We can look at policies in most industrialized nations in Europe that could be done, that could relieve us of some of this crazy polarization. So anyway, it's a topic for another discussion, but
Yeah.
I think there's other elements that you could look at. Anyway.
Yeah. It's just hard in the current media and partisan situation.
I think it's more of a grassroots talking to your neighbors, and we're not even there yet where we can even, I don't think.